Then don't listen to your customers about what the solution should be. If you're good, your job is to say, I have a different and better way to solve those problems than the way we are now or our competitors are now. So that's what innovators do.
Even great leaders get stuck. Others thrive. I'm Mark Cook, New York Times bestselling author, president of Windfall Partners. We get leaders unstuck and thriving with their teams. Clients upgrade leaders' retreats and conferences with my 5-star keynotes and breakouts on leaders' bold encounters. Also, leaders get weekly consulting as they execute key steps. Plus, brief check-ins guarantee results, live or via Zoom. After turnarounds as chief executive and 9 global studies of 2 million award-winning leaders, I've coached 4,000 client wins at top brands with my approach in over 50 cities worldwide. My Bold Encounters is an advanced system for leading. First, powerful steps on a path forward. Second, problem-solving skills that beat obstacles fast. Leaders create revenue breakthroughs and clients see new profits. Now let's lead with Bold Encounters today.
Well, welcome today. Welcome to you, Mark Coopersmith. I'm pleased to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Mark, pleasure to be here.
You know, you have a rich background in 2 areas. Usually I do the introduction, but I'm going to have you help me do the introduction because I was attracted to your propensity to wake up every day and say, how am I going to make a difference in this world? And you have 2 sides to doing that. You have the business side and the academic side. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do something unusual and ask you to set aside your modesty and tell us first about your business successes and what you've been involved with there. And then maybe I'll ask you after about your academic work and why you're there.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So with that as a caveat, kind of putting aside our modesty, I think you touched on it really well for the way that I try and guide what I do every day, which is to help make a positive change in people, places, environment every day in what I do. And I've gotten there through a pretty varied background. I started out in the entertainment business many years ago in music, and then working as a corporate entrepreneur at Sony in music, film, and others, and got me into electronics. And eventually, I ran all of our Sony e-commerce on a global basis, which was really fascinating as Web 1 was kind of coming up. Ran e-commerce, ended up building an e-commerce platform, spinning it out, started working with some of the top law firms and entrepreneurs, and in the Valley, Guy Kawasaki, among others, was an early investor, and we remained friends of the art of the start. And launched my first company, which was a payment solution. And then I was hooked as an entrepreneur. Took that company through funding and growth, and since then, have been an investor. I'm a limited partner in half a dozen venture capital funds and a CEO and an entrepreneur in technology and media and consumer products companies, an author. I've written a best-selling book called The Other F Word, How Great Leaders, Teams, and Entrepreneurs Put Failure to Work. And then work with corporates around the world in helping create cultures of innovation and execution that really help drive that same kind of change-making capability that we see in all the startups that I work with and help found every day.
Terrific. So with all that success, especially at Sony, that's a name we all know.
Right.
A little off the beaten path question because of your success in the music industry. I think all of us know someone near us that is trying to make a career in business, but in the music industry. What would you give us as advice for how to succeed as a musician or in the music industry?
No, the key thing, of course, is, he needs a half a dozen recorded songs. So, whatever those might be. So you're going to, part of that is never waste your first shot with somebody that you really want to actually succeed with. So, whether you're pitching, whether you're selling, whether you're demoing, never waste your first shot that way. Always waste your first shot where you think it doesn't matter or you're going to fail. Waste your first 10 where you think it doesn't matter, you're going to fail. Because they'll give you feedback that's super important and you'll be better. So when you're in front of somebody that you care about, you're already practiced. You already know the kinds of questions you might be asked or the kinds of responses you might get. Use that passion to also help drive community service, engagement, benefit, inspire people with dementia. I mean, I focus on that. I just worked with a company that is using music to help treat dementia, because I saw what it did with my mother when she suffered from dementia before she passed from COVID. To do that as a way of giving back to the community, and also talking about alternative ways to think about, he's able to pursue both those passions, do something great for the community, and help open a door for him in the future. Yeah, so there's a lot you could do around that. But part of that to start with is it's amazing to see. The name of the company that I just did some work with, and looks like they're on their way to fundraising, is called musichealth.ai. And there's attached to their site are a couple of videos of how music brings people to life that suffer from dementia. Social media is the way, and unless you get discovered in the old typical, kind of A&R models. I used to work for Bill Graham. I mean, my clients were the Rolling Stones and Aerosmith and the Grateful Dead, and all of those guys, Ozzy Osbourne, kind of stuff. Even Ozzy and Black Sabbath. But right now, so many of these careers are being launched on social, and what you need to do is you need to have influencers pick you up. So there's a company that came out of one of my programs called Groover. It's out of France, but they also have a US program where they help get your songs in front of influencers. The CEO's name is Romain, and he was in one of my programs a few years ago. And yeah, so it's groover.co, and in English it's groover.co/en. So
what brought you back to academic work?
So it's a fun story, and it really revolves around a complaint that I had. So I got several degrees from my alma mater, UC Berkeley, and I studied entrepreneurship as I got an MBA. And we had a pretty rigorous curriculum, but it was more case-based and writing the business case and the all of those things. And I went out and I became an entrepreneur, and I raised capital, and I launched a fund, and I hired people, and I ended up selling that. I got acquired by a public company that then got acquired by Google. So I went through a series of acquisitions. And I came back to my alma mater and I said, you know what, guys? What you taught me is not the way it happens in the real world. It was like, I want my money back kind of thing. It was one of those moments. And I guess I was a little bit whiny. And the person I was speaking with said, well, you're so smart. Why don't you come back and teach? And that just shut me up fast.
If you can do it so well, come to it and show us.
Kind of the opposite of those who can do, those who can't teach. Is like, if you're so smart, why don't you come back and teach the rest of us? So that was 20 years ago. And
I have to ask you something about this. I had a personal experience. They asked me to be an adjunct professor for a few years up at my alma mater. And I went up there, and my three leaders that were bringing me on board and instructing me, they said, listen, we have just recruited one of the greatest management minds ever, and he's here. And if you look at a normal citation for a paper in a well-known journal, you're going to see 300, maybe even a couple thousand, and it's impressive. He has 35 to 50,000 on some of his papers. And I had done enough research and secondary research to realize that 35,000, that's a lot of people referencing an academic paper. So I kind of got excited to read this very thick paper. And as I read it, I wasn't recognizing anything. And sadly, I'm just old enough to have been at a few companies that were all pretty successful and led a couple of companies, and they were also successful. And I didn't recognize anything in the paper. And I had to go back to the one that was my friend. And I said, I'm a little lost. When my academic anesthesiology brother-in-law gets together with my practicing anesthesiology brother-in-law, they can't stop talking, and the rest of us don't even get to participate in the conversation. Their language is overlapping 80%, and they're just going back and forth. But if I were to speak to this management person from just an MBA point of view in business executive success, I don't know that we would have much of a conversation. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it really, that's a great question. And actually, let me come at it a little differently than I was just about to. And that is, when you go back into academia, there are two very different approaches. I mean, there's lots of different approaches, but what I have found when I went back in as a practitioner, I'm pretty classically trained, but still as a practitioner, is those who research and those who apply their experiences and their insights from the real world and bring the real world into the classroom. Because we teach what we know. So I first started teaching how we do it, how we start businesses up. 20 years ago, we didn't have all of these accelerators and incubators like Y Combinator and 500 Startups and Techstars. And I came back and said, let's create a curriculum that does exactly that. You get an idea team, and then how do we build a venture from that? Meanwhile, my colleagues were saying, well, you can't teach that because that's not statistically significant. That's not research based. That's not, based on these 6 different theories of whatever, whatever. And I go, yeah, that's why I'm back here. Because those 6 different theories of whatever, whatever actually aren't the way it happens in the real world. So when you move back into a teaching environment, it's you teach what you know, you teach how you're wired. So I think what you experienced is that huge chasm between the pragmatic practitioner-based approach towards guys and gals, this is what the real world is like, put on your armor, versus here are these frameworks that are intellectually interesting, that are research-based, that may or may not be statistically extensible, but it's the reason for being that academics have.
Yeah,
that's what I ran into anyway, and that's why I went back to complain, right?
And it sounds right. I even from a young age, I have been thirsty to learn how other people succeed in various situations, not just general business for financial reasons, but in personal success too. But I have, for money reasons, focused mostly on the business side. But it's not that I don't value research. I value it tremendously. And my whole career, the main criteria I have set when someone's asked me about doing an executive position is, am I going to get to do a little research side project to make this position or this company better? Because I want that very rigorous learning. But it seems like there is an element of application to formulate some of those things. And if there's zero application in a person's history or in the study, then things get a little sideways. Usually it get very theoretical.
Whenever we do research, or whenever we launch a venture, because I work with hundreds of entrepreneurs every year to launch ventures, we start with a set of hypotheses. And then we go out and we do research. Whether it's academic research or if we're launching a venture, we're out talking to customers, we're out solving problems. And the question is, do you manage to squeeze the research and the results into your hypothesis to validate them? Or do you start with that set of hypotheses and then let it flow from there? And whatever the research tells you, you say, this hypothesis was wrong, this one was right. And I think that ultimately, those of us who are practitioners, while we may have a vision, if we do it right, we are open to the insights that research provides every day. I mean, that's where the Silicon Valley pivot comes from in ventures. And that's where for me, the best insights that have come out of my research have been when I went out and I found I was wrong about something that I thought I was going out to prove.
Yeah, and I think the underlying principle there financially in a business that is so powerful is if you have that mindset that you just described, testing an assumption is far less expensive than testing some code that's been written and even tested sometimes. And the time, not only the labor, but the time, testing an assumption is a much better approach than testing something that is a prototype. And let it
Absolutely.
lead to the prototypes and pivots. But I think it's a really wise piece of advice to think
Yeah,
of.
and then back to you. I mean, when I approach this, there's kind of three tests that we go through. First, you test the problem, then you test the customer, then you test the solution. You don't just go out there with the solution to start with, because you might be building the wrong solution, and you don't want to do that, as you said, until you've tested those other elements.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is in all the work that I've done research wise, and as I've witnessed corporate life compared to my own ventures, there's a commonality that looks very different. It has different clothing, but it's the same organism, and it is having a new type of relationship emerge. Every grand pursuit comes down to or is driven by relationships and a cadence towards the end goal of the pursuit. And what I've found that's interesting is there are a few types of relationships that look different. For example, a prospect is something we understand in sales. And so no one really talks about prospects unless you're in sales. But if you look at continuous product discovery and testing those assumptions as a producer of a product, it's so important not to just tell yourself that you do have immersion in the customer base, because they're complaining all the time. Like if you just talk to the current customer all by themselves, then all of a sudden you're hearing all of the complaints that they currently have. And those problems are valuable some of the time, but it can never get you to other bigger opportunities where a prospect has decided on an alternative or decided not to go with you, and the big opportunity and the big problem hasn't even emerged in your customer set because you're staying in current relationships rather than building new relationships in the prospect land. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think you have to, when you listen to customers, first of all, I'm a huge proponent of making sure that everybody in your organization talks to customers. In my corporate life, as well as in my entrepreneurial life, whenever I would take over responsibility or launch a new venture, I would have the senior executives in that group spend a day a month either on sales calls or doing customer support and answering the phones or some customer facing role, so they could hear directly from their customers. And I've run some pretty big organizations with many thousands of people, so there were many layers between the front lines and many of the executives that I worked with. And in a lot of instances, they just didn't want to do that because they enjoyed the protection from the bad news. By the time it got to them, it was filtered, right? It was a report. It was, only 6% of our customers don't love our product. So when you listen to your customers, there's a few things that happen. First of all, you really do understand the problems that they're having, the problems that they're trying to solve, but also the problems they're having with your product. And I think that's where you have to kind of hear through some of that chatter, not just this feature is bad, this feature is good type of thing, but what are the problems they're trying to solve, and how are you either helping them or not helping them enough to solve those problems? And then don't listen to your customers about what the solution should be. If you're good, your job is to say, I have a different and better way to solve those problems than the way we are now or our competitors are now. So that's what innovators do, right? They say, here's a problem, and we're not just going to make an incremental improvement. We're not going to go from, 86 to 87 on the scale. We're going to fundamentally rethink this, and how do we create a better solution? And if you can get your team thinking about that, looking for patterns in what you're hearing from customers, understanding why they might not be using your product as much, or maybe why they're using it the wrong way, that's where the big leaps happen from the standpoint of kind of making positive change.
Yeah, I saw a really basic example of that yesterday. I was driving on the freeway, and I love the examples that bring the table selling ties in New York all the way up to what was GE or Bank of America or the biggest. And if the principle applies in both, it's a pretty good principle to discover if it's true. And so I'm driving on the freeway and I see this little company, and it's a nice looking truck, but it's just a pickup truck, and it's got a tow rig and it's got a big trailer behind it with a bunch of stuff in both the bed and the trailer. And on the side of the truck, it says, "We haul junk." And I thought, that's not exactly what I've ever seen. Like, of course, we take our garbage out to the street every week.
Right.
Of course, on some Saturdays in the spring cleaning, we ourselves have to borrow a truck and pile it up and drive to the landfill. But these guys figured out, like, no one wants to do that. And you can't really stuff everything in the spring in your garbage can. So there must be a need here that we could dominate and control. And sure enough, they've had a nice truck, so they must be doing okay.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And what's interesting is why it happens. And the reason it happens, if you have a set of solutions that seem to be working for a period of time with a customer base and everybody's happy, that's great. And then all of a sudden, some of your customers start leaving, or something else happens. And for me, that key trigger is what has changed in the environment, right? So oftentimes you're going along just fine, and then something outside your control, sometimes you mess it up yourself, but sometimes something outside what you do fundamentally shifts. And what it does is it creates different expectations for your customers, and it creates a huge opportunity for your competitors. So I'll give you an example, one that we all know. Whether we like them or not, when we're in big cities, we would forever use cabs, taxi cabs, right, to get around. And there were a number of efforts to change that type of model for many years, and none of them really worked until we all started having smartphones in our pockets. And that platform shift, which meant I could, using my smartphone, hail a cab. I could see where the cab was. I could say where I'm going. I could pay the cab. I could rate the driver. I could do all of those things on my smartphone. All of a sudden changed our expectations and the capabilities of how we might think about hailing a car or using a third party to get from A to B. And up until the point that we had those, we didn't really have options. So as a leader, what you have to do is constantly scan the environment and say, is there something that's changing that might disrupt my current business? Or as a challenger, that's if you're an incumbent, as a challenger, as a startup, what's changing that I can leverage? And they happen all the time. I mean, COVID was a massive change agent, and it destroyed a lot of businesses and it created a lot of businesses.
Interesting. I want to ask you about the fundamental part of relationships before we leave that. We've drifted a bit from it, but before we leave it completely, I wanted to ask you a little bit about this. I had a client call me once, and he said, "I want you to do something for me that you've never done before." And I said, "Wow, what's that?" And he said, "We have a sales engineering team that we've designated or at least pointed to, and yeah, we have a large engineering staff, and in their particular situation, the morale is suffering a bit because there were so many of these engineers that wanted to be closer to the customer, like you're talking about, and feel like they enjoyed that work more. For whatever reason, they wanted to do some SE, some sales engineer work, not just build or test or whatever, maintain." And so he said, the problem is when we take an engineer and we put him in a sales context, the meeting's fine, the main content is fine, but it's the 5 minutes before the Zoom starts, or the 5 minutes to 10 minutes in approximate meeting before it starts. It's the breaks in between where they have to have a conversation. And then it's as they leave, how they handle it socially, and this sometimes complete social ineptness of those particular inexperienced engineers in this setting could lose us the deal. And it's so acute that we need someone like you to research how you begin and cooperate in a tiny little moment, like a social setting in business. Yeah. And I was like, wow, I'm not there. We need to get some psychiatrists and psychologists, sociologists. He said, no, I think you're the one to do it. And I'm glad to pay for a little research on your part, not extensive, but to get yourself up. So I came up with a little model. But tell me about that. Like there is a sense that there's a growing inability to converse and meet brand new people in the world today. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, that's a big one. There are so many different answers on that, especially since, we text more than we call these days, right? I mean, we've reduced everything down to our short little bites. But my first reaction was, I love this company. Because if you have a culture where the engineers actually want to talk to customers, that's amazing, right? And most times it's like you go and engineer, we want you to talk to customers. They say, I'm quitting, or don't call me, or in many cases, and I've run into that. So if there's a desire among the team to hear from the customers so they can create products that the customers want, that solve the customers' problems, that's great. Alternatively, I typically see engineers want to build what engineers want to build, and if the customers don't like it, that's their problem. So first of all, from a cultural standpoint, I love that. And in fact, when I teach entrepreneurship at Berkeley, I teach across the board. I'm going to come right back to your question. I teach business people how to launch ventures, but I also teach engineers how to launch ventures. And I love working with engineers because they know how to make stuff. So if I can give them the business skills and the process, and they can apply that core technical skill, I think I've got a superhuman. It's a lot harder to teach a business person how to code than it is to teach a person who knows how to code some of those common niceties. Now, coming back to your situation, yeah, you do have a cultural issue. And part of that would be some basic training of how you conduct a sales call. Or you can talk about the weather, don't talk about politics. You can talk about, customer success stories, but not about whatever. And giving them just a few of those things, and then creating some case studies and having them practice. Because just like you never want to do your very first demo of a product in front of a customer you really want to close, you probably don't want to trot out engineers that may not have great social skills before they've had a chance to practice in a safe environment. And then once they have those few talking points, love having them in the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, another thing that's interesting I found in my research is that leaders feel like some leaders, ones that don't win awards, frankly, those leaders don't feel like they have a responsibility to meet new people, that they are managing internal and managing customers, and that's the extent of their role. And the award-winning leaders are out in outreach all the time.
All the time.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on two things regarding that. One, how does one go to the bedrock again? How does one initiate in the very beginning a new relationship with someone that they would like? And then second, how do you personally feel like one can quickly deepen that genuine and functional relationship?
Yeah, that's another cultural touch point. We started talking a little bit about some of these cultural issues, and the world is changing so fast. It continues to accelerate from analog to digital, but of course, we still need some of those analog components. The geopolitics in the world are amazing, and where we're doing business today may not be where we're doing business tomorrow. Where we have our engineering team located may not be that where we have it tomorrow, or supply chains or other things like that. So I think it's incumbent upon great leaders to constantly get out, meet other leaders, but also investigate other disciplines. One of the key things that I try and have leaders that I work with focus on is look at adjacent markets. Look at markets that are undergoing massive change. Reach out to them and just learn what's going on. If you ever were to come take an executive course with me or work with me on anything, I would give you a list of 100 of my favorite newsletters. I don't get 100 every day, but I probably get 20 every day in my inbox around the future, around technology, around innovation, around the environment, around society. And I'm constantly looking for those differences and those patterns. And then I reach out to people, whether it's via LinkedIn or at a conference or whatever, and just have conversations that can take me in places that I might not normally think. And it's by having those conversations, by having these creative collisions, that leaders have the opportunity to change the way they see the world and to lead their company into new and exciting places. So it's always by reaching out. And I don't care if you're an introvert or an extrovert, right? You have your own personal style and way of doing it, but it's by having those conversations and by constantly consuming info every day.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, I want to move a little bit off of our innovation topic for a second. I want to ask you about you again. One of the things that happens in business life is that, and in academic life, is that all of us get stuck at some point in some way. It can be just talk to a highly successful owner, of many businesses, at least part owner of many businesses. And when he was in chief executive roles, his team was asking him to do one thing or another, like move to Brazil or, something. And it wasn't in line with what his family life and his vision for his life was. And everyone has to give sacrifices, but when you're asked to give a 10-year sacrifice and divert your life, that's a little more than a sacrifice for business sake.
Right.
And it's interesting, even those people feel stuck sometimes. And everyone gets stuck, whether they're laid off or they don't see things the same way as their own executives they've hired underneath. I mean, there's 1,000 reasons that people feel stuck in work life. Mm-hmm. Have you ever felt really stuck in work life?
Yeah, we've all been stuck, right? To your point, we all have been stuck at times in our lives where we feel that we've painted ourselves into a corner, or our mind just doesn't feel like looking externally, more like internally, along the lines of the question you'd asked previously. And at that point, you sometimes need some help to get unstuck. I live in just north of San Francisco in Marin County, California, and there's a number of my neighbors and friends who are very zen about letting life take its course, right? The way will become clear eventually. But of course, I'm also just north of Silicon Valley, where we have all these brash entrepreneurs. And I think that there's a balance that we walk, the yin and the yang between those, that we all have to traverse our own way. I think there's an element when you personally are stuck, you have to feel comfortable. You have to look internally and you say, who am I? What's my kind of driving force? For me, relatively straightforward, but it took me a while to get there. And it's quite simple, right? Every day, how do I make the world a better place for people, things, companies having interacted with me? And I'm fortunate that I've created a role where I'm able to try to do that every day with so many interactions with people. So there's an element of that where know yourself. Do I want to work with fascinating people? Do I want to travel internationally? I'm able to do that with the work that I do. Am I able to constantly deal with new ideas? For me, those are important. Yours may be different, right? As we say, your mileage may vary. But once you have a sense of what that is, once you've kind of said, what are the 3 or 4 things that are most important for me in my life, then get the hell out of the building. Right? Give yourself some milestones. Don't be patient with yourself. Find a couple of colleagues you know that are tough and say, over the next 6 months, here's what I'm going to do. And these are my milestones, not my KPIs. I'll call 12 people a day. I'll do this. Like, no. Give yourself some milestones on how you get unstuck. This is what I'm going to do by 2 weeks from now. And I ask people for that. I say, give me your milestones over the next 3 months. Great. Now, put that on your calendar and call me in 3 months and tell me how you've done against those. And then check in every month. And I think it's by driving that personal self-accountability that you get unstuck. A clear vision of who you are, hopefully a vision of where you want to go, and then driving clear accountability. And don't do it by yourself. Friends, colleagues, whatever. probably outside of your family, probably maybe outside of your closest friends. Why? Because they love you. They're going to be nice to you. They're going to give you a mulligan. You want people that go, no, no mulligans. What the heck is going on with you? So those are just, for me, how I've gotten unstuck. It's with personal understanding of myself. It's with intentionality of where I want to go, even though there may be multiple outcomes. And then it's by this accountability that I personally try and drive for myself or for others that I work with to help make that change happen.
Yeah, it's a great answer. I think even in a situation where you're getting out of it and you're trying to succeed, I talk about a cadence, and you've just described one, and there's always a first step. I find that one of those latent contacts that provides new value is both safe and unsafe, like you're saying. And it's really, if someone is not feeling like doing any outreach and getting to know new people and asking for those adjacent experts that you talked about, or the customers or the prospect, or people that can shake you out of what you know and give you more knowledge, one of the things you can do is just go to the latent ones, go to the ones that you haven't talked to for 3 years, and just pick up the phone and call an old colleague and just be honest. Like, I haven't done a good enough job staying up to date on you. I want to spend 15 minutes and catch up, and let's reconnect and go to breakfast or lunch or have a Zoom, and then get professional on that second interaction. The great thing about just picking up the phone and leaving a voicemail and getting that return call for 15 minutes and with the intention of deepening it. If you just think you're just going to do it for 15 minutes, then it's kind of an awkward, strange thing. But if you have the intention and you're just honest, like, I'd like to reconnect. I want to go to breakfast. I'm not selling you anything. I feel like we need to reconnect, and I want to buy, and let's do it. The thing is that 15-minute call becomes so much more valuable, and you actually have some humanity take place, and it enlivens your attitude and your energy and your excitement about making the next call. You will not even be able to make one call. It's that first outreach that's so hard when you're in a stuck situation. Now, back to the cadence. You talked about doing some things. Once you do the first one, there's some things that happen. When you're in a successful business that's trying to grow and strive, there are also strategic cadences with individuals, teams, new organization, cross-functional teams, and things. Tell me some of your thoughts about creating a cadence of accomplishment and success in an organization when you're not stuck.
Yeah, that's a great question. Anytime you study organizations and business, you become an amateur psychologist. And my father actually was a psychologist, so I guess I had the dining room table of the amateur psychologist. And there are a couple of key takeaways from a business standpoint about creating change, about creating a cadence that I've observed and done some work around. One of them, as we know, is that we as humans are creatures of habit. We may say we love change, but typically we really don't love change. And shifting habits is really hard. If you own a business and you want to shift the habits of customers, that's really hard. So, and if you want to shift the habits of your employees or yourself, that's really hard. And studies have shown that the best way to shift habits is to create a repeatable process that you can help drive consistent outcomes. Pavlov did a lot of research around that, right? Pavlov's dog, where eventually the dog would figure out by pressing a lever, he or she would get a little treat. And it's through this helping people understand or become, I hate to use that reference with people, but I will, right? By reinforcing the kinds of behaviors that we as leaders want, we can drive change in organizations. But before we started, Mark, you and I were talking about a panel that I conducted not too long ago with the CEOs of some really great innovative companies, Electronic Arts, Adobe, Workday, Franklin Templeton on the investment side. So really innovative companies that have teams that have to drive change every day. And we ended up spending much of this panel talking about exactly this topic. And over time, as the CEO started to share what they did, they basically said, look, to drive innovation, we have to have people change what they do. And to get them to change what they do, we need to reward them when we see that positive outcome. We need to catch them being innovative and then trumpet it to the world and maybe give them a bonus on top of that. And by consistently catching people doing these things, by letting them know what you expect and then reinforcing that behavior, you're able to change the culture. You're able to change activities and behavior. You're able to change outcomes. And as a leader, you have to be really consistent about that. And you can't do it on 10 different activities or behaviors. You have to be super focused on where you want that change to happen. Communicate it and reward it. And that's a way to shift culture, behaviors, innovation, and drive change.
Yeah. And I think what they're saying is, in a human sense, unlike, Skinner or Pavlov, the celebration of humanity, like that you helped someone else and we succeeded in a cooperation and you were part of that. Congratulations. And here are the specifics of how you solved the problem and how you behaved with the team. And I think that is a very human reward that goes deep and forever, rather than here's a new bike.
Yeah, exactly. If I may, let me add one thing to it, because it talks to the book that I wrote, The Other F Word, about how we learn from failure and the psychology elements of it. Because if you want to drive change, what does that mean? Every time you ask somebody to do something new, there's a bigger chance they're going to fail because they don't know how to do it. So the more innovation you want, the more new things you try. The more new things you try, the more little failures along the way you're going to have. And that opens people up to vulnerability, because the more failures they have, especially if it's an environment where failure gets punished, the less change they want to try, the less new things they want to do. So what you need to do is to recognize that the more innovation you want, the more change you want to drive, it's okay if little things don't work out. And you don't have to love failing. None of us do, right? And that's not my point in my book. It's just to recognize, make small failures along the way so you don't have existential failures and you paint your organization into a corner you can't get out of. And I have one little example that I want to share. And that is a company that's obviously fundamentally successful, Amazon. And Jeff Bezos, years ago, decided, as he was selling a lot of things, that he wanted to compete with eBay. Why should eBay own the auction marketplace? So he launched Amazon Auctions. Some of us may remember it. And Amazon Auctions did not succeed. Why? Because eBay had a kind of a natural monopoly in that market space, right? Buyers went there because there were lots of sellers. Sellers went there because there were lots of buyers. So eBay ultimately survived the challenge by Amazon, which was a pretty powerful competitor. So what Bezos did was he shut down Amazon Auctions. Two takeaways. Number one, on the first day of Amazon Auctions, Bezos went onto the site and he bought this cave bear skeleton. It's like this 12-foot tall, mean ass bear that, existed, hundreds of thousands of years ago. So he bought this cave bear skeleton. Well, after he shut Amazon Auctions down, he took that cave bear skeleton and he put it in the lobby of Amazon. And he put it in the lobby of Amazon for a couple of reasons. Number one, to say, if you don't evolve, you're going to end up like the cave bear, right? Extinct. And number two is, I tried this and I failed, and it's okay. I'm going to celebrate this failure. The second point is he learned, and his team at Amazon learned so much through Amazon Auctions that they created the Amazon Marketplace based on those learnings. And the Amazon Marketplace is where tens of thousands of sellers around the world use the Amazon platform to sell products on the Amazon platform, the Amazon way. The takeaway from failing at the Amazon auction site, but launching the Amazon Marketplace, he opened up a market that's 10x what the auction site would have been.
So he learned from that well thought out failure.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the takeaway is, what did we learn? Oh, we know how to run a marketplace. We're just not going to compete with eBay on their terms. Yeah. We're going to change the narrative and use this marketplace understanding to win on our terms. And that's what they did.
And I think what you say in your work is that to turn failure away from being an F word, that you celebrate the well thought out attempt, not the haphazard attempt. I mean, we all have to try every day. Just getting out of bed is an act of faith to flip the light switch and assume the light's going to go on. But so it's the well thought out. We're going to do something big. We're going to make a difference in the world, like Mark Coopersmith. And we're going to think through it. We're going to test assumptions. We're going to do everything we can. We're going to outreach. We're going to try this the best we can. And if we fail, I expect to be standing up there in front of the department, and someone's going to be celebrating my well thought out attempt.
And then we're going to say, how do we put that to work? So you're so right. Since I wrote the book, of course, there's a framework in the book. I have a 7-stage cycle, right, of how you limit failures, but when they happen, how you benefit from them the most. And one of my stages, stage 5, to be precise, is called reflect, which means after you've had the failure and you've limited the damage, before you cover it up, reflect. What did we learn from this? What did we get wrong? What did we get right? Are there any insights that we didn't expect? And then you put them to work in the next stage, which is the rebound stage, to do exactly what you said. That's what Bezos did with Amazon auctions. He shut it down. He goes, wow, what did we learn? And then he launched the marketplace. And it's through that processing of failure and extracting the wisdom that comes from it, right? There's always insights in there, and you paid a lot for those insights because you failed. You might as well put them to work.
Yeah. Couple of last questions, because I think you're the right person to ask these of. First of all, I had a discovery in a couple of the pieces of work that I did where the humans that were on a team that went into the space of the problem and observed in context people in need won awards. People that are sitting in offices and cubes and in buildings or over Zooms alone and guessing and betting on these assumptions rather than testing them out in the real world don't. I think in all business history, maybe the most famous case of this is New Coke. Let's put 2 drinks on a table, Pepsi, New Coke, and let's change the recipe until New Coke tastes better than Pepsi. Great, we've done it. Replace the classic, put the new on the shelf, and it's going to sell like hotcakes. But because they took it out of the full context of shopping and psychology of people that buy the classic Coke, it was a miserable failure. And I think it's one of the iconic historic examples of contextual inquiry and go to Gemba and product ethnography and just getting in the space of the problem and testing these assumptions and discovering problems. And what are your thoughts about context and learning in your innovative world?
Yeah, well, the answer to that, kind of along the lines of what we've been talking about, to use your Coke example, is I like my Coke, right? It's like there's certain parts of our life that we don't like change. I might want a new car. I don't want a new Coke. There's certain elements that we are nostalgic around. I mean, taste studies show that actually Pepsi tastes better than Coke, but Coke outsells Pepsi by a large majority, right? Coke said, oh, well, we're going to deal with it. It turns out people didn't care that much. They just wanted their Coke. They didn't want change. And you're so right. That took place in some ivory tower somewhere, probably with some market research, but misguided, with people who had hypotheses that they squeezed the data to fit, and then they launched it, right? And we know there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. So if you're good, you can get your numbers to validate almost anything. So it's getting out of the building. It's understanding that if there's one thing that doesn't change, it's that change will happen at different paces in different ways. And if we don't recognize that, and we don't understand who our customers are and what they anchor around, Coke, and where they want new things using technology to hail a cab, if we don't experience what they are experiencing every day and get out of the building, then all the stuff that we think are just ideas and hypotheses, and we're going to be wrong more often than we're right.
Yeah. Okay, last question. I think you're a great person to ask this question of. We hear a lot in all the professions that I work with in clients. You have a different version of this where it's important to help other people, or you're going to benefit the customer, or everyone has some version of help other people rather than yourself. And it sounds woo-woo, it sounds soft, it sounds like it's just an aspiration. And yet my data shows that's what it's all about. If someone is focused and intentionally thinking, how do I fulfill that need in not just a good way, but in a way that delights that other human being that I call a persona or a target market, if I can delight them, I win awards. And not only that, ironically, instead of just helping them, I help better my market than people that rely on market research to try to get the commonality of the masses and then apply it to the individual. It's ironic, but it works less well to do it that way than to keep a constant discovery of individuals that then build up maybe a more statistically valid understanding, because the individual is what we are. And so helping other people isn't some soft idea. It's a primary endeavor in business and in life. And you wake up and try to do it every day. I'd just like to have you talk about the validity in a business sense of helping other people.
Yeah, not everybody is going to have that same approach that you or I might have. I've gotten to a certain point in my kind of life journey where this is my touch point. And it wasn't always that, right? We're able to reach, when we attain certain milestones, whatever they are, we evolve and are able to do some of those things. But I think regardless, if we take a look and dedicate ourselves towards solving big problems at its essence, then there's a great ROI on that. Now, I think there's a great ROI on driving positive change, on doing favors for other people, because for every favor that I deposit in the favor bank when I help others, I actually rarely have to make a withdrawal. Why? Because they are more eager than I can often imagine to not just repay me, but to repay me with interest. So whether that math works for you or anybody listening, that's up to you. But if you want to drive change, if you want to be successful in this world as a leader, or as a sales executive, or just in your own personal life, solving problems, if you can be a problem solver, there will be no shortage of people that are going to beat a path to your door. And we all know those people inside the organizations as well, right? And they're invaluable, and they're not always at the top. I mean, I tend to call them GSDs, which is people who just get stuff done. Sometimes instead of stuff, we'll insert another S word, right? So, and those GSDs typically will be successful over time. And if we can go through life solving people's problems that way, coming up with better products, better solutions, driving better advice, creating more efficient ways to do it, creating a better customer experience, if we can do that by understanding who our users are, our stakeholders in our personal lives, and especially in our business lives, we're going to be successful.
Mark Coopersmith, thank you for joining me today. It's been great.
Mark, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us to get leaders unstuck and thriving with their teams. You've heard a little bit about the power of bold encounters and leadership. Watch on. Go to full episodes with the iconic expert interviews at markspencercook.com/podcast. And please subscribe. My site takes you directly to YouTube video and podcast versions. Please make comments. Share this with your friends. Also, reach out to us to just brainstorm your priorities, challenges, events, or how Bold Encounters might help. Visit windfallpartners.com. Click the Let's Talk button without obligation and reach out. I look forward to speaking. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's lead with Bold Encounters today.